In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome back to The Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 114 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it. Today, we are continuing our conversation about the music of Thomas the Tank Engine. Our last episode was an interview of Mike O'Donnell, who was one of the composers of the original Thomas and Friends music, including that famous theme song. Now, we are talking to Luke Pickman. He is Instrument Maniac on YouTube, and he is reimagining these themes, talks about his process for listening to them and expanding on the original ideas into longer pieces of music, and his recording process along the way. His videos are very creative. I have a couple linked in the show notes for this episode that you can check out, or just go search Instrument Maniac Thomas on YouTube. You'll find his stuff there. We'll then be reviewing the new book, Steam and the Family, by Avril Rowlands, known for her work on God's Wonderful Railway, the BBC TV series. And then, the question of the day. Our second guest today is an instrument maniac. Specifically, he is the Instrument Maniac on YouTube, where he covers a number of theme songs and music from TV shows and video games. Specifically today, we are talking about his work covering music from Thomas and Friends. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Luke Pickman.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
When we were talking to Mike, and this was completely unprompted, we were talking to him a little bit about the fandom and the response to the music and the longevity of it. And the one guy he mentioned specifically by name was you.
Oh, really? My God, no way. That means a lot. Wow. Oh, he's such a legend. Oh my God, Mike is incredible.
He absolutely is. But hey, your music is incredible interpretation of his work. For folks who haven't seen one of Luke's videos, first of all, you got to go to YouTube, search Instrument Maniac, and his stuff will come up, and you have to check it out. It is so well done. The first 2 to 3 minutes of that video is the piece in question, whether it be a Thomas theme or from some other show. And what Luke is doing is he is recording all of these instruments individually and then piecing this together as a mosaic. Video-wise, there you'll see him with his cello, with his bass flute, his alto flute, etc. And some videos he has featured musicians. And then at the end, he talks a little bit about the process of how he came to interpret that theme. That's what you could expect, but you got to go check out his work. A good place to start is that you've actually been doing music on YouTube for at least a decade. What led you back to exploring the music of Thomas and Friends?
Yeah, so it was a weird circumstance, like everything is, it seems like. So music on YouTube is actually my part-time job. I'm a scientist on the other to pay the bills. And so a lot of the times, what I'll do is, when you create a cover on YouTube and you don't have a lot of time, you want to make sure it's something that people engage with and people want to watch, because you don't want to waste 15 hours on something that nobody's going to really care about. So I'd always, like, as a kid, I watched the Thomas VHSs religiously. My parents had got me all the wooden trains and everything, and so for so many years growing up, I had these like themes baked into my head, just from years and years and years of just listening to them nonstop. To the point where, like, if I was like running late for a meeting or something, I'd have Gordon's theme running in my head. Or if I was feeling like swanky, I would like feel like, oh, that's like a James theme vibe. But Yeah, so I didn't really, because they were so ingrained in my head, and I didn't really see anyone talk about them very often. I didn't think that people would be really into them being covered. And so actually right in 2020 when that certain event happened, uh, I just kind of said, I think it was March actually, like when it went down, I just said, screw it, I'm just going to try to record a theme. And so I chose to do Gordon's theme, and then people really liked it, and I was like, oh, this is a surprising response. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll try Diesel's theme, and then it kind of just snowballed from there, and now I make train content nonstop. So yeah.
How many themes are you up to at this point? You've now put out 4 albums and you're working on your fifth. You're at least, what, 3 dozen or so?
Yeah, it's like I think we're getting close to 50. I think it's like 45 or something. There's I never realized there is so much music in this show. Oh my god, there is so much music in this show. Like there's so many incidentals that they just had and composed, and then, it was 25, 30 seconds and they don't use it again. And it's like, but it's gold. I mean, it's a beautiful theme, and you're like, I need to cover everything. Oh my god.
That's part of what's really nifty about your approach to these themes. And I'd be curious to hear you talk about it in general, but as somebody listening to them, you take something that's maybe a minute at most. And so oftentimes these themes are 30 seconds, maybe even 15. And you're able to expand on that into a full 2 to 3 minute piece just based off of those motifs that feel so fitting. How do you go about that process?
So that one's really tough. I actually started when I started doing these, I started with kind of the meteor composition. So like Gordon's theme is a pretty long and well fleshed out theme. So that one is easier to kind of like do a direct cover of it and kind of just loop it twice and maybe add a little more percussion the second time. Same with Diesel. It's a very kind of there's just a lot of meat there. But kind of as I've done more of these now over the past almost 2 years, I've kind of like had to wade into the the themes. Like I think the worst one was Duncan. I mean, it's literally 10 seconds and it's just drum set and clarinet. Like that's it. It's like 10 seconds of that. So actually for that one, that was actually so far my like biggest challenge. And at that time I was playing a lot of the game Cuphead that has a big band vibe to it. And so I was just playing that. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I could just take Duncan's theme and then make it like some kind of like a boss from like a Cuphead fight. And then just kind of make it this jazzy kind of, I don't know, kind of like kind of old jazz kind of rumba type of thing. And so it was kind of a fun it was fun to reference his original theme at the beginning and then just kind of take it in a totally different direction. And then the thing about that, it's good and bad because I don't know how people are gonna respond. I think some people are really purist about the whole thing and they want it just to be a straight up cover. And and that's what I give them, like a little bit of that, like first 20 seconds, like I'm giving you that straight up cover, but then like I'm taking it somewhere else because nobody wants to listen to that for 3 minutes. I'm sorry, like nobody wants to listen to that riff for 3 minutes. So
George's theme is pretty much identical in medley to Duncan's. And so then when you did that, and this was so creative, the original, for those who aren't familiar with it, is kind of like a slow klezmer piece, is the best way to describe it. And you do that traditional theme for the first 20 seconds, and then you turn it into this lounge bossa nova jazz piece where I can see the smoke in the air, and it's such a different take on it, but I love it. I love that it takes this idea and expands on it, and I think that there's something interesting to the idea of taking a musical theme and playing with it.
yeah, and actually that one too, I think that was maybe the month I just bought a bass flute and I was like, I gotta use this bass flute somehow. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna figure it out. And so I'm like, it'd be so good to have like a nice smoky jazz club bass flute solo that's just like sultry. And the worst one about that video, if you watch it again, is when I do an instrument change in a video, I have to think about how much time it'll take to switch instruments. And some of the frames, I didn't think about that very much. So I had to re-record a bunch of times because I had to like run across the room to grab something else and switch it in the middle of the video. So there's a lot of takes in that one.
Once you've kind of listened to a theme, you say, I want to take on this as a challenge. What is the actual process for transposing the music and recording it?
Yeah, so that usually it's pretty straightforward. And I actually even did a video on it, like a really long video on it. But I'll find the theme I want to do. I'll like listen to the episode that it features in, and then I'll snip out the audio from that episode usually. Unless someone's there's great YouTubers that take the episodes and take out the narration, which has been very helpful. So I'll take that audio and then I'll throw it into my music software. And then I usually spend a few hours just listening to the music and then transcribing each line by ear. So that's actually I think the biggest skill that I've developed with this is because with the Thomas music, there's no sheet music really for any of this, and there's very few MIDI files, which is kind of like the computer equivalent of music notation. A lot of times people will have MIDI files for certain songs, and you can kind of take them and arrange them that way. But no, with this, it's kind of an exercise in just listening to something and then deconstructing it by ear. And actually, the hardest one recently I did was the one, the Duncan Gets Spooked one, because when you have like a bunch of orchestral lines going on, it's hard to piece out the strings from one another, especially when it's like synth strings. They're kind of hard to tell apart. Usually with real instruments, I can kind of like hear the individual sections a little easier. But so once I get all of that, once I totally transcribe and take that music I'm listening and put it into notation, then the next step is kind of like, do I want to do a more direct cover of this and kind of copy the instruments that Mike and Junior had used in their original synthesizer versions? Or do I want to make it more orchestral, maybe add more string lines? Or what I do a lot with like Rusty or Stephanie is like make it more swoopy. Add more pits, strings, and more flutes, and kind of make it like a nice 60s session music, jazz kind of thing. So that's kind of most of the process, and then I'll arrange it, and then I kind of get exactly the instrumentation I want, and then I'll record it. But then, as I talked about before, a lot of it now is I'm getting, I guess, a little bit more confident in not only arranging but adding new melodies and harmonies that are kind of my own creation. So it feels like it's in a way like a collaboration. I don't know, it's like I get a fanboy on Mike and Junior's work, and then I get to add like a little of my own stuff, and it just feels like it's a gratifying experience to kind of collaborate with them without them knowing exactly.
As of October 2021, when we're recording this, your latest video is of the Duncan Gets Spooked theme. And the music from that, it is more orchestral, it is more filmic. When I heard that and the sophistication of your arrangement, it was there. What are times that you felt like I've taken a particular step? You accomplished something, you felt like, oh, this is really a turning point for me. I gained this new level of confidence. I gained this skill.
Yeah, that's actually, it's funny because I feel like with this project, even though I think to an outside observer, it's like, oh man, he's just really into those train themes. He just cannot stop. But what I love about these is actually, I feel like I've grown a lot as a musician, specifically to doing. I mean, I've been taking violin lessons now for about the past 5 years. And just even recording these orchestras again and again, I feel like it's strengthened a lot of my abilities to do violin. And so it's exciting to, like the one that I'm recording now, Murdoch's theme, I'm kind of able to get the violin sounds that I want a lot easier. Because the thing that people, I guess, sometimes don't realize is if you're a multi-instrumentalist, all of your instruments are at different levels of abilities. And so you kind of have to work around to make things sound good. You have to kind of work around your weaknesses and not show that exactly. And so a lot of the time, my weakness before was violin and viola, because I've only done those for like 4 or 5 years, whereas cello I've done for maybe 12. And so a lot of in the earlier compositions, I would throw a lot more of the string lines over on cello. But now I feel like I'm able to actually, fully embrace the full orchestra vibe and give that full string section. So I guess it's every time it's like kind of trying something new, and especially like you said, the Duncan, it's nice to bring the full orchestra in. Totally.
You did a video as well showcasing your large stable of instruments. Roughly how many do you have that you play? You have, again, dozens.
Yeah, it's always such a hard question because when people ask that, they're like, "Well, how many instruments do you play?" And then I always answer back, "Well, do you count alto sax and tenor sax as different instruments? Because they're like the same thing." So then how do you quantify that? It's like this is this is like the number one existential question I just always like have in my head, and I cannot figure it out. So I don't even know how many instruments I play. But I can tell you I own about 80 something, 90 something. There's the harp. I guess they don't have video, but there's a harp behind me, so I can't really hide a pedal harp because it's like 7 feet tall.
It always makes a particular impression in your videos, especially hearing those lovely harp swells.
Oh my God. I'm doing a rent to own for my harp teacher, and like it's so nice to have a pedal harp because it just gives that like, oh, it's like a full orchestra. You just feel like the vibe from the pedal harp.
When you're not cloning yourself a million times in video and recording the parts, you are featuring collaborators. Looking first at the individual collaborators, how do you come across these people and what is their take on this project?
Yeah, so I actually originally was kind of nervous to ask people to work on this because, as you know, it's kind of like a niche. It's extremely niche. So I actually hit a wall when I was doing Percy's theme, which is the tiny little green engine. That it's a very kind of peppy, upbeat theme. It's like a lot of piccolo and flute. And I think in the original, they kind of had a stand-in for a washboard kind of vintagey kind of jazz, percussion thing. And so I was trying to figure out what to do for percussion because I'm really not that great at percussion. And so I was like, man, a washboard would be really great. So I just kind of like spent the next few weeks just listening to washboard music on YouTube. And then I stumbled onto the Washboard Resonators, which is this kind of like this duo. This guy Martin plays guitar, and this guy Jack Amblin does washboard, and it's incredible, like super vintagey jazz. Go check it out; it's so fun to listen to. So I was just listening to their stuff, like because I enjoyed it for weeks on end, and I'm like, you know what? I should just like send Jack an email and see if he'd be okay doing this. And so I sent him an email, and he was like, "This is new and I'm down." And so I sent him the parts, and he recorded washboard on it. And then I think now we've recorded like 5 or 6 themes together. I call him the drum wizard. He is like so good at drums and anything percussion. I'm like, you are a living metronome. I don't understand how this works. I don't know what you guys do, how you practice this, but like you have the tempo inside you. So yeah, I kind of just see people I like, and then I'd send them a message being like, "Hey, do you want to do this? I realize this is really weird and out of the blue, but like, you should think about it."
It's great to see how many people you've brought together through it. I think one of my favorite featured artists was the woman that you had on recorder for Salty's theme, which has a very sea shanty vibe.
Yeah. That was actually a huge stretch for me because Sarah is she's like, I think she's honestly a recorder influencer. She has like some hundred thousands of followers on YouTube, and I just sent her an email. I'm like, I realize this is like probably nothing that you're into, but like, do you want to record a sea shanty on recorder? And she's like, of course, like I would love to. And yeah, I think overall, almost everyone I've asked has like said yes to it. And I don't know, it's really taught me that it never hurts to ask a question. Like, even though you may get like turned down once or twice, like you'd be surprised by the number of times people actually are down to collaborate with you, even if you're a lot smaller of an artist or a channel, just if you have like a concept or like a creative idea that people really gel with.
That's what's so great about online communities, when you look at all the different niches of rail fandom, whether it be photography or modeling or music, the way that it allows us to come together and collaborate in different ways, as showcased by these two gigantic bandwagon collaborations that you've done with your followers.
That broke my computers. It's too much.
Well, yes, I imagine having 40 different videos played at once in a single stream is a lot for a computer to process, especially when they're HD videos. I will say, as an accordion player, I have had immense fun in participating in them.
Thank you for being part of them.
My pleasure. I'm curious as to where the idea came from for that and what the experience has been like for you putting those two together, both Engine Roll Call, which is the newer Thomas theme, and the classic Thomas anthem, which is the song that people are probably most familiar with.
I guess it started, I had a few people in the comments that were like, well, can I be in one of your videos? And I was like, I don't know how to approach this, because I want to include people, and I'd seen other people do large community collaborations, but I wanted to make sure that everybody, I guess my whole thing is, if I want to do a community collaboration, but I want to make sure that there's a way for everyone to be part of it. You don't have to necessarily be musical. You can just be like into Thomas. And so the first video I did was last year, and that was the Engine Roll Call, and that was a pretty sharp learning curve. I asked people to send in videos of them. I put out sheet music, and I asked them to record a line of music or clap along. And then I got all these videos back, and then I guess I didn't realize the acrobatics of editing. I thought I knew about video and audio editing, but getting it was like 50 audio and video tracks, all in varying conditions of background noise and stuff. It was definitely a good learning experience. But I think in the end, when I finally had the premiere and people watched it and they saw themselves being part of it, it really was worth it, because I think it's a lot of work, and I don't think a lot of people want to go through all that work, understandably. But I think when you see the final result and you see people come together, and especially in this most recent one where I included people's art, it was just fascinating to see, everybody's dedication to this different series and what it means to different people. And it felt really special to give everyone a chance to show, what they're into about it and what it means to them. And so, yeah, even though it was even more work this year, and it actually, I think at one point I have a terabyte hard drive and it was taking up the full terabyte on my computer. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do right now. I started to delete some files to finish this whole thing. But yeah, it's definitely something I want to do every year, because I think it means a lot to people, and it means a lot to me.
Music in general, as a musician, I know how much it means to me, both in terms of performing it as well as how it informs my work in video editing. What does it mean to you as a form of expression and creativity?
I think for me, growing up, I don't know if other people have this experience that play music, but growing up, I think you are given an instrument at age 10 and you're told to learn that, and that's your instrument, and you'll just get really good at that one. And I just never envisioned that as the path for me. So I started on flute at 10, I think. I've been doing it 20 years now. And I just was so interested in the different colors that each instrument brings, and just the totally different vibe that it to me, it's almost like when you record, it's like painting with sound color in a weird way. And so I love color. I love musical color. If you listen to French Impressionist composers like Ravel or Debussy, they really love in their orchestra compositions just really giving that full, just saturated fantasy of color. And so I guess that's what I always had really envisioned. And for me, the reason that the Thomas thing came along, it was so perfect. It's kind of like this perfect match doing these themes, because it gives me a framework to work in. I have to make a theme that people can recognize, but it's I can do whatever I want color wise inside of that frame, and I can decide to make things the same or like change them as from the original recording. And I think it's just it feels like a playground to work with such incredible music that Mike and Junior left us, and then I don't know, being able to put my own color on it. It's just it's been a great learning experience, and it's actually I think why I will probably I don't know continue to do this until I run out of themes. I don't even know what to do if you can run out of themes, maybe at some point.
Maybe at some point, but they did leave a lot behind. So
There's a lot behind. I at least have another 2 or 3 years. So
for folks who maybe aren't musicians or are less familiar with the complexity of the Thomas music, how do you envision, in general, both inside and outside of Thomas, the relationship between music and trains?
I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's like we had talked about before we were recording. I just think what Mike and Junior did for that relationship was so beyond what could have ever happened, I think, ever again. Just the way, like you said, it's a lot of trains are just associated with banjos, and it's like kind of this like mountain railroad, like throw a banjo on there, throw a guitar on there. But it just really, I don't know, they through the music of that show, it elevated the show to a point where I think if they didn't have the music, I think the show would still be great, but I don't think it would have the same nostalgic staying power as it did. And I think just like I mentioned, like I associate like Gordon's theme, like running late for a meeting. I think there's probably a lot of people in this world that have some version of that stuck in their head if they see a train or if they're going to something that's so deeply ingrained with those themes that if they heard it again, it's like smelling something that you remember from a long time ago. You'd be like, oh, I remember that. And I think I've seen a little bit of that when I in some of the comments on my videos, it's like people saying, oh, that's where that was from. That's like a train song. That's what trains are. And I'm like, yeah, exactly, right. So yeah, it's just again, like all of the praise to Mike and Junior for just gifting us such great compositions. I don't know the definition of trains. Praise.
Praise to them for coming up with the themes, but praise to you for doing such a wonderful job of reinterpreting them and turning them into these wonderful, lush, orchestral, jazzy pieces that really go the distance as far as making the most of each of those musical ideas and bringing people together through it. It's a small sub-niche of a niche.
Niche.
A niche. But you've demonstrated that there's something to it, and it's always fun to explore these here on the Roundhouse.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Luke, thank you so much for joining us. You can check out his work on YouTube at Instrument Maniac. I'll have a link in the show notes. Prepare to get lost for a couple of hours in his themes. And I do mean a couple of hours, as we said. 45 themes is a lot to explore.
It's a lot to get through. I can't even watch them all in a row anymore.
And that's just when we're recording this. Whenever you're listening to this, there might be twice as many. So be sure to check those out. Luke, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's time for another book review, and this month we're taking a look at Steam in the Family, a historical fiction novel by Avril Rowlands. Avril wrote the stories for the BBC TV series God's Wonderful Railway, and you might recall that we interviewed her on the show earlier in 2021. She was kind enough to send me this book to proofread even before it was published. Steam in the Family is set in Acton, Chalcot, a fictional town in the UK served by both the Great Western Railway and the London North Eastern Railway. The events center around the Watkins family. Fred, the father, is a longtime and well-respected engine driver for the GWR, and is thrilled that his son Tom is beginning his first job with the railway as an engine cleaner. There's only one problem. Unbeknownst to Fred, or perhaps because he doesn't want to recognize it, Tom absolutely hates trains. Will working for the railway be the right fit for him in the long run? How does he grow through the team building that railroading requires? Along the way, various smaller stories crop up, and we visit these at different points throughout the novel. The supporting characters and their journeys help make the world feel lived in, without ever becoming too confusing. My favorite is another engine driver named Dai, a cheeky guy who becomes involved in a relationship with Tom's sister Sylvia, despite the objections of her father. He's one of those characters that makes me smile every time he appears on the page. Acton Chalcott feels like a real town, and the author's extensive research into railway history shines. There's enough for the railway enthusiast to know what locomotives are described, usually by their locomotive numbers, requiring this reader from the United States to use Google to look up what kinds of locos are being referred to. But not so much as to lose the interest of the casual reader. The events that take place on the trains are key to moving the story along, although well-written dialogue between characters within the town and surrounding areas also provides great detail. Ultimately, this fully illustrated world is one that I think many of us could travel back in time to experience, but its depiction is one that does not sacrifice realism for the sake of nostalgia. When we talk about railroad history, the tendency to focus on historical nonfiction means we often neglect the more human aspects of railroading. We can learn so much about how people may have felt and experienced life in these bygone eras from stories like these. Seeing Tom start as an engine cleaner and move on to other jobs illustrates the working environment and conditions as well as any nonfiction book. Plus, it makes his education relatable. This is a book that I can recommend to lovers of historical nonfiction, not just rail fans. You can buy it as an ebook or regular book from Amazon. I give Steam and the Family 5 stars.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to Jason Johnson, the general manager of the Pennsylvania Railroad T1 Trust, which is building a Pennsylvania Railroad T1 from scratch, which led to the question, what locomotive would you build from scratch? A lot of you had some very creative responses. First, from the roundhousepodcast.com, Grant Geist writes, everyone always says a New York Central Hudson, but I would build a New York Central Niagara. With it and the Penn CT1, you could recreate the famous race out of Chicago. From YouTube, Miles Spear writes, if money was an issue, I'd build a Louisville and Nashville Big Emma. If money wasn't an issue, a Milwaukee Road Class A. From Twitter, the rail fanning boy writes, Central Pacific 173. I actually had to look up this engine, and it turns out it's the template for the CK Holiday at Disneyland, so that's an interesting choice. From Facebook, Nick Turinetti writes, Canadian National's proposed 1940s branch line 262, probably about the perfect new build for heritage rail operations. Agreed, Nick, and honestly, any day you have to build a Canadian locomotive of any kind is a good day. Chris Eden Green writes, the London Midland Scotland Turbomotive number 6202. If anything, it would be interesting to hear what she sounded like. And Frank DiStefano writes, Delaware and Hudson Pacific with UK-inspired Lorry styling and elephant ears. I agree with you, Frank. Those Delaware and Hudson engines had such unique looks for American steam locomotives. It is a shame that we don't have any that survive. As for me, as you might have guessed from the hint when I posted this to social media, my choice would be a Great Eastern Railway J70, aka the real-life Toby the Tram engine. Your question of the day for this episode is, what is your favorite piece of music that makes you think of trains? Now note how I worded that. You could choose something like Wabash Cannonball or something that's directly about trains, but I'm interested to see maybe there's songs that aren't specifically about trains, but gives you that feeling. Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media are there. Thank you guys for tuning in. It has been such a fun 2021. We're getting down to the end of the year. Not quite there yet, but I just really appreciate having you along for the ride. Remember, as always, that the Roundhouse is our house.